At 00:30 hours on March 3, 1942, Captain Albert Rooks stood in the pilot house of USS Houston, watching the forward turret train toward another Japanese transport silhouetted against the burning shoreline of Bantam Bay. The turret was his last operational main battery. Turret 3 Houston's aft turret had been destroyed at Darwin 3 weeks earlier, leaving Houston with only 6 of her 9 8-inch guns, and those 6 guns were running out of ammunition. The magazines reported fewer than 50 rounds remaining. Houston had been firing continuously for nearly 4 hours, engaging Japanese destroyers, cruisers, and transports in the most confused and desperate naval battle Rooks had ever experienced. Ahead, HMS Perth was burning. The Australian cruiser had exhausted her 6-inch ammunition 15 minutes earlier and was under fire from multiple Japanese vessels. Behind Houston, Japanese destroyers were closing launching torpedoes, their searchlights sweeping the water searching for targets. To the north, the Japanese invasion fleet, over 50 transports and escorts, was scattered across Bantam Bay, some vessels burning from earlier hits, others launching troops despite the ongoing battle. Houston and Perth had sailed into the middle of a Japanese amphibious operation, disrupted the landing, sunk multiple vessels, and fought for 4 hours against impossible odds. Now both ships were dying. Their ammunition exhausted, their crews fighting on with whatever weapons remained, refusing to surrender despite knowing that survival was impossible. At 00:33 hours, Houston's forward turret fired its final 8-inch salvo. 3 shells arced across the dark water toward a Japanese destroyer at 8,000 yards. All 3 missed. The turret captain reported over the sound-powered phone, "Forward magazines empty, no rounds remaining." Captain Rooks acknowledged the report quietly. Houston could no longer fight. Her main battery was silent. She had perhaps 50 rounds of 5-inch ammunition left in the secondary guns, enough for 5 minutes of firing, then nothing. A 950-ton heavy cruiser designed to fight other cruisers and support fleet operations was about to die because she had nothing left to throw at her enemies except the courage of 1,000 men who refused to quit, even when their ship had no ammunition, no chance, and no hope except dying well. USS Houston was a Northampton-class heavy cruiser, the 6th ship to carry the name, built at Newport News Shipbuilding and commissioned on June 17, 1930. She displaced 950-ton standard, measured 600 feet long, and could make 32.5 knots from geared turbines producing 107,000 shaft horsepower. Main armament consisted of 9 8-inch 55 caliber guns in 3 triple turrets, 2 forward and 1 aft. Secondary armament included 8 5-inch 25 caliber anti-aircraft guns in single mounts. The ship carried 4 aircraft on catapults for reconnaissance and spotting. Houston was flagship material from commissioning. She had elegant lines, spacious accommodations, sophisticated communications equipment. President Franklin Roosevelt used her as a presidential yacht for cruises in the 1930s, traveling to South America and the Caribbean. The crew called her the galloping ghost of the Java Coast after her service in the early months of World War II, when she survived multiple battles that destroyed much of the Allied fleet in the Pacific. When Japan attacked Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, Houston was at sea near the Philippines. She immediately began war patrols, escorting convoys, searching for Japanese forces, supporting the desperate defense of the Philippines and Dutch East Indies. In January 1942, she joined the ABDA American-British-Dutch-Australian Command, a multinational force attempting to defend the Dutch East Indies against overwhelming Japanese invasion forces. On February 4, 1942, Houston was in Darwin, Australia, when Japanese carrier aircraft attacked the port. Bombs hit Houston's aft superstructure, destroying Turret 3 and killing 60 men. The explosion wrecked the turret's machinery, jammed the guns, and made the turret inoperative. Houston's main armament was reduced from 9 guns to 6. Repairs would require months in a major shipyard, but no shipyards were available. Japanese forces were advancing rapidly. Every ship was needed, damaged or not. Houston would fight with 6 guns instead of 9. She continued operations with the ABDA fleet, participating in the Battle of Java Sea on February 27, 1942. That battle was a disaster. Dutch Rear Admiral Karel Doorman led 5 cruisers and 9 destroyers against a Japanese covering force of 4 cruisers and 14 destroyers. The battle lasted 5 hours. Japanese torpedoes sank the Dutch cruisers De Ruyter and Java and the British destroyer Electra. HMS Exeter was damaged. Admiral Doorman died when De Ruyter sank. Over 900 Allied sailors were killed. Houston survived by withdrawing when the battle turned against the Allies. On the evening of February 28, Houston and HMS Perth were at Tanjung Priok, the port serving Batavia, now Jakarta, Java. Both ships were refueling when orders arrived to evacuate Java immediately via Sunda Strait. Japanese forces would land on Java within days. Any Allied ships remaining would be trapped and destroyed. Sunda Strait, the narrow passage between Java and Sumatra, was believed to be clear of Japanese forces. The ships would transit at night and reach the Indian Ocean by dawn, then sail to Ceylon or Australia. At 1900 hours on February 28th, Houston and Perth departed Tanjung Priok and steamed west at 20 knots toward Sunda Strait. Captain Rooks commanded Houston. Captain Hector Waller commanded Perth. Both were experienced officers who understood their situation clearly. Java was doomed, the ABDA fleet was destroyed. Escape was the only option. Intelligence suggested Sunda Strait was undefended. That intelligence would prove catastrophically wrong. The 2 cruisers steamed through the night without escort, no destroyers, no air cover, no support. They were alone, hoping to slip through Sunda Strait before Japanese forces realized they were there. At 2306 hours, Perth entered Sunda Strait from the south. Houston followed at 1,000 yards distance. The strait was approximately 16 miles wide, at this point dark and calm. Visibility was perhaps 1,000 yards, no moon, heavy tropical air. At 2315 hours, lookouts spotted ships ahead. Many ships. Waller raised his binoculars and counted 2 columns of transports destroyers on the flanks, possibly cruisers further out. This was not a patrol. This was an invasion fleet. The Japanese Western Java invasion force, consisting of 56 transports carrying 20,000 troops, escorted by 1 light cruiser, 8 destroyers, and supported by 2 heavy cruisers. Over 60 Japanese vessels were concentrated in and around Bantam Bay, preparing to land troops on Java's western coast. Houston and Perth had sailed directly into the middle of this massive operation. Turning back meant certain interception by Japanese forces behind them. Going forward meant fighting through whatever the Japanese could throw at them. Captain Waller made the only decision consistent with his duty: attack. At 2316 hours, Perth opened fire on the nearest Japanese destroyer. Houston opened fire seconds later. The Battle of Sunda Strait had begun. For the first 20 minutes, the Allied cruisers had the advantage of surprise and superior gunnery. Perth's 6-inch guns and Houston's 8-inch guns fired rapidly at Japanese destroyers and transports. Japanese forces were disorganized, not expecting Allied cruisers to appear in the middle of their invasion fleet. Multiple Japanese vessels were hit. The transport Ryujo Maru was struck repeatedly and began sinking. Destroyers were damaged. Fire control was disrupted. The Allied cruisers were carving through the invasion fleet at high speed, firing at every target visible. But Japanese response was swift and overwhelming. Destroyers throughout the fleet launched torpedoes. Cruisers Mogami and Makuma, positioned northwest of Bantam Bay, detected gunfire and steamed toward the battle at high speed. Within minutes, Houston and Perth were under fire from multiple directions. The water filled with torpedo tracks. Japanese searchlights snapped on, illuminating both Allied cruisers. Anti-aircraft fire from transports and destroyers created a curtain of tracers and exploding shells. At 2335, the first torpedo hit Perth on the port side forward. The explosion flooded several compartments and reduced speed. Captain Waller continued engaging targets. Perth's guns maintaining rapid fire. At 2348, 2 more torpedoes hit Perth port side amidships. The explosions destroyed boiler rooms and flooded engine spaces. Speed dropped to 15 knots. The ship began listing. Waller ordered counterflooding and continued firing. Perth's crew was running low on 6-inch ammunition. The forward magazines were nearly empty. Houston maneuvered to support Perth, engaging Japanese destroyers attempting to close for torpedo attacks. Captain Rooks positioned Houston between Perth and the heaviest Japanese forces drawing fire that might otherwise have hit the damaged Australian cruiser. Houston's 6 operational 8-inch guns fired continuously, perhaps 5-6 rounds per minute per gun, putting approximately 180 rounds per minute into the Japanese formation. At midnight, Perth fired her last 6-inch shell. Her main battery was silent, magazines completely exhausted. Only 4-inch anti-aircraft guns and machine guns remained operational. Japanese destroyers closed in firing at point-blank range. At 05 hours on March 1st, a 4th torpedo hit Perth's starboard side. The explosion caused catastrophic flooding. The list increased to 30 degrees. Captain Waller gave the order to abandon ship. The crew began going over the side into the dark water. At 25 hours, Perth capsized and sank. Captain Waller remained on the bridge and went down with his ship. 353 men were killed. 328 survivors were in the water, many wounded, all facing hours in the ocean before Japanese vessels would pick them up. Those survivors would spend the rest of the war as prisoners, many dying in Japanese captivity. Houston was now alone, surrounded by Japanese vessels, fighting in waters where her companion had just died. Captain Rooks had watched Perth go down. He knew Houston's situation was equally desperate. But Houston still had ammunition. Her magazines reported approximately 300 rounds of 8-inch shells remaining. As long as Houston had ammunition, she would fight. Japanese forces concentrated on the remaining American cruiser. Destroyers launched torpedoes from multiple bearings. The heavy cruisers Mogami and Makuma engaged with their 8-inch guns at ranges under 10,000 yards. Houston was hit repeatedly by shells, but none struck critical spaces. Her engine rooms remained functional. Her magazines were intact. Her fire control systems worked. She continued maneuvering at high speed, engaging targets, firing until the ammunition ran out. At 00:15, a torpedo hit Houston on the starboard side aft, damaging the steering gear. The ship's maneuverability was impaired but not eliminated. Damage control parties rigged emergency steering. Houston continued engaging targets using local control when central fire control was disrupted by near misses. At 20, another torpedo hit starboard side amidships. The explosion flooded several compartments but did not cause immediate catastrophic damage. Houston's excellent damage control prevented the flooding from spreading. Counterflooding corrected the list. The ship remained operational despite accumulating damage that would have sunk vessels with less capable crews. But the ammunition was running low. At 00:25, the forward magazines reported fewer than 100 rounds remaining. Captain Rooks knew the end was approaching. When the ammunition was gone, Houston would be defenseless. Japanese destroyers would close to point-blank range and torpedo the helpless cruiser. The crew would die in the water, like Perth's crew. There was no escape, no rescue, no hope except dying while still fighting. At 00:30, the forward turret fired its penultimate salvo, 3 8-inch shells toward a Japanese destroyer. Then, at 00:33, the final salvo, 3 more shells, and the magazines were empty. No rounds remained. Houston's main battery, the 6 8-inch guns that had been firing continuously for over 4 hours, fell silent. The gun captains reported to the bridge, magazines empty. Captain Rooks acknowledged calmly. He ordered the 5-inch secondary guns to continue firing with whatever ammunition remained. The secondary magazines reported approximately 50 rounds total, perhaps 5 minutes of firing. Houston's 5-inch guns engaged Japanese destroyers closing from astern, firing slowly to conserve ammunition, each shell carefully aimed, knowing every round counted. At 00:40, the 5-inch guns fell silent, secondary ammunition exhausted. Houston had nothing left except machine guns, small arms, and the determination of men who refused to surrender. Japanese destroyers closed to within 1,000 yards and fired torpedoes. 3 torpedoes hit Houston almost simultaneously, 2 port side, 1 starboard. The explosions tore the cruiser apart. Massive flooding occurred throughout the ship. The list increased rapidly. Power failed. Lighting went out. The ship was dying. Captain Rooks gave the order to abandon ship. The crew began going over the side, but Rooks did not leave. He remained on the bridge as his ship rolled over. He was last seen standing at his post as Houston capsized. At 00:45 hours on March 1, 1942, USS Houston sank in Sunda Strait. She came to rest upside down in approximately 100 feet of water. Approximately 700 men from Houston's crew of 1061 were killed, including Captain Rooks. 368 survivors reached the water and were picked up by Japanese vessels over the following days. They spent the rest of the war as prisoners of war. Many died in captivity from disease, malnutrition, and brutal treatment, particularly those forced to work on the Burma-Thailand Railway. 291 Houston crew members survived to return home after the war ended. The Battle of Sunda Strait was a tactical disaster but a strategic and moral victory. Houston and Perth disrupted the Japanese landing, sank at least one transport, and damaged multiple vessels, delayed the invasion by hours, and demonstrated that Allied forces would fight to the death rather than surrender. The sacrifice brought no strategic advantage. Java fell to Japanese forces within days, but it showed Japanese commanders that every Allied position would be contested, that conquering Southeast Asia would cost blood. For Houston's crew, the battle was the culmination of 3 months of constant combat. Since Pearl Harbor, they had fought in multiple engagements, survived air attacks, lost 60 men at Darwin, participated in the Java Sea Battle, and continued operating despite damage and exhaustion. They had been given an obsolete cruiser with 1 destroyed turret and ordered to contest Japanese naval superiority with no realistic hope of success. They had done their duty, fought their ship, and died when the ammunition ran out. The ammunition situation was critical throughout the battle. Houston began the engagement with approximately 1,200 rounds of 8-inch ammunition in her magazines. Normal loading was over 1,500 rounds, but Houston had not had opportunity to completely replenish after previous battles. She fired approximately 150 rounds during the 4-hour battle, an average of nearly 5 rounds per minute per gun. This rate of fire sustained for hours was possible only because the crew had drilled constantly, perfecting loading and firing procedures until they were automatic. But even perfect execution could not create ammunition that did not exist. When the magazines emptied at 00:33 hours, Houston had been firing for approximately 4 hours and 15 minutes. The crew had fired every 8-inch shell they possessed. They had continued firing secondary guns until that ammunition was exhausted. They had used every weapon available, and when nothing remained, they prepared to die with their ship. The wreck of USS Houston was located in 2004 by recreational divers. The ship lies upside down in approximately 100 feet of water in Sunda Strait. The wreck is remarkably intact, despite being underwater for over 60 years. The wreck is designated a war grave and is protected under American law. Diving is prohibited without special permission. The wreck has suffered from unauthorized salvage operations over the years, with metal being illegally removed for scrap. This desecration of a war grave led to international protests and agreements to better protect the site. Monitoring has increased, but enforcement in Indonesian waters remains challenging. In Houston, Texas, the city for which the cruiser was named, memorials honor the ship and crew. The Houston Ship Channel is home to multiple monuments. The battleship USS Texas, now a museum ship, displays artifacts from USS Houston. Every year on March 1st, memorial services are held to honor Houston's crew and all American sailors lost in World War II. Captain Albert Rooks was posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor for his leadership during the Battle of Sunda Strait. The citation credited him with extraordinary heroism, distinguished service, and conspicuous gallantry above and beyond the call of duty during the final battle. Rooks had chosen to fight when retreat might have been possible, had positioned Houston to protect Perth, despite knowing it exposed his ship to greater danger, and had continued engaging Japanese forces until ammunition was completely exhausted. The survivors, who spent 3.5 years as prisoners of war, endured unimaginable conditions. Japanese treatment of prisoners was brutal. Inadequate food, no medical care, forced labor, routine beatings. Many Houston survivors were forced to work on the Burma-Thailand Railway, where conditions were so horrific that approximately 13,000 Allied prisoners and over 100,000 Asian laborers died during construction. One survivor, Commander W.J. Galbraith kept a secret diary throughout his captivity, despite the certainty of execution if discovered. Galbraith survived and published his diary after the war, providing detailed accounts of the battle and subsequent imprisonment. Another survivor, Ensign Charles Smith, wrote extensive accounts of Houston's final battle that became the basis for official naval histories. USS Houston was awarded 2 battle stars for her World War II service. A second USS Houston, a Cleveland-class light cruiser, was commissioned in 1943 and served throughout the Pacific War. A third, Houston, a Belknap-class guided missile cruiser, was commissioned in 1967. The name continues honoring the ship and crew that fought until ammunition was exhausted. The Battle of Sunda Strait is studied at naval academies as an example of fighting against overwhelming odds. The tactical lessons are debated. Should Houston and Perth have attempted withdrawal when they first spotted the invasion fleet? Could different tactics have achieved better results? Would surrender have saved lives? Most historians conclude that Rooks and Waller made the only decisions consistent with their duty and training. Naval officers do not retreat when encountering enemy invasion forces. They attack. The outcome was predetermined by the forces involved, but the decision to fight was correct regardless of outcome. This principle that duty requires action even when success is impossible is central to naval tradition worldwide. Houston's story resonates because it exemplifies this principle. The ship and crew did not die through error or surprise. They died doing exactly what they were supposed to do, engaging the enemy, fighting until ammunition was exhausted, refusing to surrender. That they were overwhelmingly outnumbered does not diminish their achievement. If anything, it enhances it. The final moments when Houston's forward turret fired its last salvo at 00:33 hours represent something profound about military service. The turret captain knew those 3 shells were the last. The gun crew knew the magazines were empty. Captain Rooks knew his ship would die within minutes. Everyone knew. But they fired the salvo anyway, aimed carefully, executed properly, because that was their duty and their training and their identity as naval gunners who fought their ship until nothing remained. Modern analysis using Japanese records confirms that Houston and Perth sank at least 1 transport, damaged multiple vessels, killed hundreds of Japanese sailors and soldiers, and delayed the Java landing by several hours. The tactical impact was limited. The strategic impact was negligible. Java fell regardless. But the moral impact was significant. American and Australian forces had demonstrated they would fight to the death rather than surrender. Japanese commanders learned that conquering Southeast Asia would require fighting for every position. The cruiser that fought until it ran out of shells became a symbol of Allied resistance during the dark early months of 1942, when Japan seemed invincible, when every battle ended in Allied defeat, when survival seemed more important than honor. Houston and Perth chose honor. They fought when flight might have been possible. They died when their ammunition was exhausted rather than surrendering with ammunition still in the magazines. They demonstrated that courage does not require victory, that duty transcends survival, that fighting when defeat is certain can be more important than winning when success is possible. USS Houston went down in Sunda Strait at 5 hours on March 1, 1942. Her magazines empty, her captain on the bridge, her crew at their posts. She stands as a memorial to all sailors who have fought hopeless battles because duty required it, who have faced overwhelming odds because honor demanded it, who have chosen death with dignity over survival with shame. The cruiser that fought until it ran out of shells was destroyed in 4 hours, but her legacy endures, a testament to the courage of ordinary men doing extraordinary things when their country needed them, most firing their guns until no ammunition remained, then preparing to die, because dying well was all that remained when fighting was no longer possible. The final salvo at 00:33 hours on March 1, 1942 was not a waste. It was defiance. It was duty. It was Houston's crew saying that as long as 1 shell remained, they would fight, and when no shells remained, they would die as they had lived, serving their ship, their country, and the traditions of the United States Navy that required fighting until the end, regardless of odds, regardless of outcome, regardless of hope. The cruiser that fought until it ran out of shells taught that lesson in blood and steel in the dark waters of Sunda Strait, and that lesson echoes through naval history as a reminder that sometimes the most important battles are the ones you cannot win but must fight anyway because honor and duty demand it.